My name is Lily James, and I'm 42 years old. If you'd told me 5 years ago that the worst day of my life would also be the day I finally became invisible to the people who raised me, I would have laughed. I would have thought you were being dramatic. But here's the thing about invisibility: it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a memo. It just settles over you like fog, and by the time you realize you can't see your hand in front of your face, you've already been lost for years. My husband vanished on a Thursday in March, and my mother told me I was being too emotional about it 3 days later. Let me back up. Growing up, I was the kind of child who made herself small, not because anyone told me to, not explicitly anyway, but because I could read the room the way some people read maps. My older sister Monica was the kind of person who commanded attention by simply existing. She'd walk into a room and people would stop mid-conversation. She was beautiful in that effortless way that made you feel ungracious for noticing. She was sharp-tongued and confident, and had this ability to make you feel like the world revolved around her gravitational pull. I was 3 years younger. I was quiet, I was careful. I got good grades, but they didn't matter because Monica got good grades too and she looked pretty doing it. I went to my school's science fair in 5th grade. My mother didn't attend because Monica had a soccer game that night. I understand that now. I didn't understand it then. My father was a corporate accountant. My mother was a homemaker who had transformed managing the household into an Olympic sport of logistics and criticism. They had immigrated from India in their 20s, worked brutally hard, and created this vision of a perfect American family: 2 daughters, a nice house in the suburbs of Connecticut, family dinners at 7, church on Sundays, everything catalogued and controlled. Monica fit into that vision. She was the accomplishment they could point to and say, "See, we did it right." I was the question mark. Not in an obvious way. I wasn't a troubled kid. I didn't rebel or act out. I was just less loud, less remarkable, less present. I'd try to tell my mother about something interesting I'd read, and she'd listen for about 7 seconds before her attention drifted to whether the countertops were clean. I participated in school clubs. My teachers wrote nice things on my report cards. But there was always this underneath current of disappointment, as though my very existence was a minor administrative error that everyone was too polite to mention. Monica noticed. I think she knew exactly what she had and she worked it. "Mom, Lily got an A- on her history essay," she'd announce at dinner, and the way she said it made it sound like I'd failed. Then sometimes a day later, I got an A+ on mine. She was never mean about it, and that was the genius of it. She was helpful almost. She was just informing everyone of the facts. By high school, I'd learned to not expect much. I took the SAT and scored 1480. My father congratulated me with the kind of enthusiasm someone reserves for acceptable tire pressure. Monica scored 1520. That became the story, not my score but the gap between us. I applied to college's early decision to UMass. I chose early decision partly because it was practical and affordable, but partly because I didn't want to compete with Monica anymore. She applied to schools in the same tier as the Ivy Leagues, and she got in, and I was genuinely happy for her. I'm not being performatively virtuous when I say that. I think I was just relieved to have a different track. She could be the golden child and I could be something else. Something else, that was the dream. I didn't know yet that something else would mean invisible. UMass was a good school. I chose psychology as my major because I was interested in how people worked, why they made the choices they made. I studied hard, I made a few close friends. I had a boyfriend sophomore year and a girlfriend junior year, and I learned that I wasn't heterosexual, which felt important and terrifying and true. I got my degree. I was proud of it, even though I knew it wasn't the same as Monica's business degree from Yale. Monica got a job at a consulting firm in New York, making what I assumed was an obscene amount of money. She wore Prada. She got engaged to a man named Derek who was handsome in that aggressively polished way that made me suspect he practiced his smile. My mother called me to talk about Monica's engagement party, which I was expected to attend and help organize, which I did, because I was the kind of person who always did what was expected. I was also the kind of person who had decided, without saying it aloud, that my family was a place I would visit but never really belong. After college, I moved to Boston. I worked as a counselor at a community mental health center for 5 years, making practically nothing and loving the work with a desperation that suggested I was trying to pour myself into other people's healing to distract from my own. I lived in a studio apartment in Somerville. I had a therapist of my own, who gently suggested that I might want to consider why I'd made myself so small, and I nodded and paid her, and went home and thought about it for approximately 3 hours, before shoving it into the file cabinet in my brain labelled, "Things to think about later." Later never came. When I was 28, I met David. He was a nurse at the hospital where I sometimes did outreach work. He was 5 years older than me, with kind eyes and a laugh that came easily, and he had this way of really listening when you spoke, like your words mattered enough to be heard completely. He asked me out 3 times before I said yes, which should have told me something about my own self-worth, but instead I interpreted it as persistence, which is something I found charming in retrospect. David was good for me, not in a magical movie way but in a real way. He didn't need me to be anything other than what I was. He was perfectly happy to go to dinner and just listen while I talked about the patterns I was seeing in my work with clients. He met my family at some mandatory gathering, and my mother found him acceptable, which was approximately as warm as she ever got. Monica was polite but distant with him in a way that suggested she was performing the role of supportive sister for an audience that didn't exist. 3 years into dating, David proposed. He got down on one knee in the parking lot of a coffee shop we loved, and it was stupid and perfect and completely unplanned. I cried. I said yes. I called my mother, who asked when the wedding would be and suggested a nice country club in Connecticut. I should have known then. I should have seen the shape of what was coming. But I was in love, and love makes you stupid in certain specific ways. We got married small, just immediate family and a few close friends, 70 people in a rented garden. My mother spent the week before the wedding suggesting things I should change about my appearance. Monica gave a speech that was technically very complimentary, but somehow managed to make the whole day feel like it was happening to her instead of to me. David held my hand through all of it, and I tried to make this moment about him and me and what we were building, separate from the gravity well my family created. After the wedding, we moved back to Connecticut because David got a better job opportunity at Yale New Haven Hospital, and because I wanted to be closer to my family, which, looking back, seems insane, like I was a magnet that kept moving toward someone holding the opposite pole and kept wondering why it hurt. I applied to graduate school for clinical psychology. I got in everywhere I applied, which was the first time I remember my father looking at me with something that might have been actual pride. I chose the University of Connecticut's program because it was close, and I was still doing that thing where I tried to manage other people's approval by proximity. My father, and I'm being specific here because this matters, called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I was sitting in the coffee shop where David and I had gotten engaged, grabbing papers for my part-time job at the community college. "Your mother told me you got into the program," he said. "Yes," I said, "all 3 programs actually, but I'm going to UConn." There was a pause. I could hear him breathing through the phone. "That's good, Lily, that's very good, I'm proud of you." I cried in that coffee shop for like 10 minutes straight, and I think that should have told me something too, that I was so starved for paternal approval that one sentence could liquefy me, but mostly what it told me was that I was finally on the right track. Mommy and Daddy would see me now. I was building the thing that would make me visible. I started graduate school. It was harder than my undergraduate degree, but the kind of hard that felt purposeful. I was learning to do something real, to actually help people, not just listen to them. I was in practicum, doing supervised therapy under a mentor named Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, who became the first adult in my life who seemed to see me without me having to work for it. She was in her 60s, Nigerian-American, with grey hair she wore in long braids, and this uncanny ability to call out your bullshit with so much warmth that you almost didn't mind. "You're very apologetic," she said to me once about 6 months into my practicum. "Even when you're setting a boundary, you apologize for it. Why is that?" "I don't know," I said. "I guess I don't want people to feel bad." "At the expense of your own feelings." I didn't answer, but she knew. "Your clients will do what you model," she said. "If you apologize for existing, they'll apologize for healing. Be very careful about that." I thought about that a lot. In my 2nd year of graduate school, I was working part-time at a clinic and doing my clinical practicum and writing a thesis that was starting to actually matter to me. I was 24 credits in at a point when I was supposed to only have 18. My advisor had to have a conversation with me about slowing down, about burning out, but I couldn't slow down. Not yet. Not until I had something that would make sense of everything, all the invisibility, all the years of trying to be good enough. It was during this time that my father had a conversation with me that, at the time, felt wonderful. We were at their house for Sunday dinner. My mother had made something elaborate. Monica had not come, she was busy with something in New York. My father waited until my mother was in the kitchen and said quietly, "I wanted to tell you something. When you were young, I wasn't always the best at showing you that I saw you. I was focused on other things, work, making sure Monica was okay after some stuff happened with her that you might not remember." He paused. "I know that wasn't fair, but I see you now and I'm impressed. I want you to know that." It was the most honest thing my father had ever said to me. I remember very clearly the exact shape of that moment, the way the light came through the window, the way he was looking at me, the way my heart felt like it was being squeezed and released simultaneously. "Thank you," I said, "that means everything." And he nodded, and my mother came back in with the rice, and we ate, and I thought I had finally passed whatever test I'd been taking my entire life. I didn't know that this moment, this admission, this acknowledgement, was actually the moment he was setting the stage for something else entirely. I didn't know it was the moment the lie was being prepared. David had always wanted to travel. When I finished my master's program, when I had my degree and my license, and I was officially Dr. Lily James, clinician and therapist, we decided to take a trip to Greece. We saved up. We planned it for months. It was going to be the thing we did to celebrate all the work, all the struggle, all the years of me grinding towards something I still wasn't entirely sure I'd be able to articulate. We were supposed to leave March 10th. On March 8th, David went into work in the morning like he always did. I had a client at 10 a.m. and another at 1 p.m. We texted during his lunch break. He asked if I wanted him to pick up Thai food for dinner. I said yes. I asked him what time he'd be home. He never answered that text. By 6 p.m. I had called the hospital 3 times. He wasn't there. Nobody had seen him since his shift ended at 2 p.m. By 7 p.m., I was in police stations being told that they couldn't file a missing persons report for 24 hours, even though my husband of 4 years was missing. By 8 p.m., I was trying to figure out how to call his parents while my voice was doing something strange and disassociating. David's car was found 3 days later at a rest stop off Route 91, south of the city. His phone was in the front seat. His wallet was in the console. What was not found anywhere was David. The police worked the case. His parents came to stay with me. We held a press conference. We posted his picture on Facebook and it was shared thousands of times. There was, for a moment, a very real investigation into foul play. But as the weeks went on, the conclusion became less dramatic. David had likely walked into the woods. They found hiking trails near the rest stop. They searched and searched, but there was no body, and after a certain amount of time, missing people become a different kind of absence. People had theories. They thought he was depressed and had hidden it well. They thought maybe he was in crisis and didn't know how to ask for help. Someone suggested that maybe he'd wanted to disappear and had left me intentionally, which was the kind of thing that made me want to bite people. But mostly, everyone just got sad for me and then moved on with their lives, because tragedy is only interesting until it becomes inconvenient. 3 days after David disappeared, my mother called me. "Lily," she said, her voice had that tone in it, the one that made you prepare for disappointment. "We need to talk about you being realistic about what might have happened." "What do you mean?" "Well, honey, sometimes men, they do things, sometimes they leave, and I just think you're being too emotional about this. You need to focus on moving forward. This is what closure looks like." I was standing in my living room, and David had been missing for 3 days, and my mother was telling me that my emotional response to my husband vanishing was inappropriate. "Mom, he hasn't been found yet. The police are still searching." "Yes, but they'll search for a while and they won't find anything, and then what? You're going to grieve him for how long? Lily, you need to be practical. You need to focus on your job and your life." I hung up. I don't remember hanging up, but I must have, because the next thing I knew I was on my kitchen floor, and David's parents were calling to see how I was doing, and nobody seemed to understand that the ground had actually disappeared beneath me in 2 completely different directions. The weeks after David vanished were a specific kind of hell. I didn't go to work. I couldn't. Every nerve ending was raw. I'd inherited some money from an aunt who died the year before, about $50,000, and I used it to hire a private investigator who found nothing but also found everything. He found David's high school diary in his parents' attic in which David had written about depression. He found that David had been saving money for months. He found patterns that suggested, maybe, that David had been thinking about leaving for longer than anyone realized. But he also found nothing concrete. No body, no confirmation, no closure, that word my mother kept using like it was something you could gift wrap and present to someone who was still actively dying. The first month people brought me casseroles. The second month they stopped. By month 3, most of my friends had either drifted away or been driven away by the exhaustion of trying to help someone who couldn't articulate what help even looked like. David's parents kept in touch, which was both a mercy and a specific kind of torture, because every time I saw them, I wanted to apologize for their son vanishing, and for not being able to prevent it, and for being the person he left behind. My therapist, who was a different therapist, not Dr. Sarah anymore because I couldn't afford to see her private rate anymore, kept saying things like processing grief and the stages of loss. But the truth is that grief doesn't have stages. It has pockets. You'll find one moment and the next moment you're crying in a grocery store because they're out of his favorite bread. I took a medical leave from work. My job was understanding. The program coordinator, a woman named Margaret, called me personally and said, "Take the time you need. We'll find coverage, focus on yourself." It was kind, and I hated myself for how much I needed kindness in that moment. It was 6 weeks after David disappeared that my mother called again. "Lily, your father and I have been thinking, and we want to have a family meeting. Can you come to the house on Sunday?" I almost didn't go, but there was something in her voice, something that seemed to carry weight beyond my husband being missing, so I went. I drove to the house where I grew up, and I felt like I was 17 again, bracing for disappointment. My father was there. My mother was there. Monica was there, which was unusual for a Sunday, because Monica lived in New York and didn't usually come back to Connecticut without warning. "Lily," my father said, and I could see that he'd aged, actually aged in the time since David disappeared. His face was hanging differently, like gravity was pulling harder. "We need to talk about what you told Monica about some things that happened in your past, private things." I went cold, not the cold of fear but the cold of betrayal, the kind of cold that has texture. "I didn't tell Monica anything private," I said. "Not recently," Monica said, and there was something in her voice, not cruelty but calculation. "But there were things you told me when we were younger, things about our family, things about your sexuality, your relationships, personal struggles you were having." I was staring at her. "Yes," I said, "you're my sister, I told you things." "And I've been thinking about those things," Monica continued, "and I've been thinking about how they might reflect on our family. Specifically, I've been thinking about your suitability as a therapist." The room was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. "Your suitability to be a therapist," my mother repeated slowly, like she was testing out the words. "I'm not sure someone with her history should be working with vulnerable populations," Monica said. She was looking at her nails. She was completely comfortable. "Particularly clients dealing with sexuality issues or family trauma. I think there's a real question about her objectivity." My father didn't say anything. My mother didn't say anything. They just looked at me like I was a problem that hadn't quite been solved yet. "Is this a joke?" I asked. "No," Monica said. She looked at me for the first time. "I think you should resign. I think you should focus on getting help for yourself before you hurt someone else." "Based on what?" My voice was shaking. "You're a business consultant, Monica. You have no expertise in mental health. What are you bussing this on?" "I've been talking to people," she said, "professionals, and they agree that someone with your background." "What background, Monica? I'm licensed. I've been through extensive screening. I have a clinical supervisor. What are you talking about?" But I already knew what she was talking about. She was talking about the fact that I'd told her in confidence, when I was 23 years old and terrified, that I was bisexual and had been in a relationship with a woman. She was talking about the fact that I'd told her I struggled with depression in college. She was talking about the fact that I'd been honest with her in the way that you're honest with your sister when you think she loves you. My mother cleared her throat. "Lily," Monica brings up good points. "And frankly, with everything that's happening with David, we think you might want to focus on your own mental health rather than taking care of other people." "David being missing is not a mental health crisis," I said. "It's a disappearance, it's a crime, it's something that happened to me." Yes, but your reaction to it, my mother said, and here was the cruelty, the thing that would anchor itself to me for years. You're being very emotional about it, you're not being rational, you're not moving forward, and Monica is right, I'm not sure someone in your state of mind is ready to be therapist to others. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember the drive home. What I remember is sitting in my car outside my apartment and realizing that my sister had somehow taken the thing I was most proud of, my degree, my license, my ability to help other people, and had convinced my parents that it was a liability. I called my supervisor the next morning and told her I was taking an extended leave. I didn't tell her why. I said it was for personal reasons related to my husband's disappearance, which was true, just not the specific truth. She was sympathetic and understanding, which made it worse. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Monica. I changed my number, not because I thought they'd call, but because I knew they wouldn't, and I didn't want to have to experience that silence every single day. For the next 8 months I existed in a kind of fugue state. I was 38 years old, and everything I'd built had collapsed in a period of about 1 month. My husband was missing. My family had disowned me. My career was suspended. My apartment felt like a shoebox in a storage unit. I had money still from that inheritance, and I was grateful for it every single day because at least I didn't have to worry about rent while I was coming apart. I saw my therapist once a week. Dr. Huang was a woman in her 50s with silver glasses and a way of not trying to fix things that made me feel less broken. What do you need right now? She asked me, and I realized I didn't know. I'd spent 40 years being what other people needed. I need to be by myself and not feel like I'm failing at it, I said. Then be by yourself, she said. That's not a failure, that's called survival. I did that. I stopped answering emails. I let my friends' checking-in calls go to voicemail. I didn't shower for 2 weeks once and I didn't care. I read books and I watched television and I allowed myself to take up space in a way I'd never done before. It was terrifying and lonely, and it also felt like the first honest thing I'd done in my entire life. By month 4 I was cooking again. By month 6 I was taking walks. By month 8 I was thinking about going back to work, not because anyone was making me, but because I missed it. I missed the feeling of being useful. I missed having clients who trusted me with their pain. I called Margaret. She listened while I explained that I needed to talk about returning, but slowly, maybe part-time at first. Lily, your job is waiting for you, she said. Come back whenever you're ready. We're going to put you back in the schedule. I returned to work 9 months after David disappeared. I took 2 clients at first, then 4. I worked on being present in a way that didn't require me to be perfect. I stopped waiting for David to be found and started allowing myself to understand that he was gone in a way that was both temporary and permanent. I didn't have finality, but I had to build a life anyway. It was during my 2nd week back that Margaret called me into her office. I wanted to tell you before it became general knowledge, she said. We've had a complaint filed against you. The world did something strange. It tilted. What kind of complaint? It's regarding your suitability to work with clients. Specifically, it questions whether your personal struggles might compromise your ability to be an objective clinician. I couldn't breathe. I could not actually draw air into my lungs. Who filed this complaint, but I already knew. It came anonymously, but it references information about your sexuality, your family history, depression you've experienced. It suggests that you don't have the psychological stability to work with vulnerable clients. My sister had found a way to destroy me from a distance. She'd filed an anonymous complaint, though of course it wasn't anonymous to me. I knew exactly who had done this. That would force me to go through an investigation. I would have to prove my suitability. I would have to relive every intimate thing I'd ever told her. I want to see the complaint, I said. Margaret slid a folder across her desk. I read it, and it was like reading a document about someone else, someone whose private moments had been weaponized, whose honesty had been converted into ammunition. The language was clinical. The allegations were vague enough to be damaging and specific enough to be credible sounding. What happens now? I asked. We have to conduct an investigation, Margaret said gently. You'll have the opportunity to respond. The board will review. But Lily, I want you to know that I believe in you. This is probably just someone who's going through something. Sometimes complaints like this are about the complainant's issues, not about the validity of the complaint. I didn't tell her that the complainant was my sister. I didn't tell her that this was personal. I just said thank you and left her office and went home and didn't get out of bed for 3 days. The investigation took 2 months. I had to provide documentation of my education, my training, my clinical work. I had to meet with the licensing board. I had to sit in a room with 3 people who I didn't know and explain why the fact that I was bisexual didn't make me unfit to be a therapist, and why the fact that I'd experienced depression didn't mean I wasn't capable of objectivity, and why the fact that my husband had disappeared didn't mean I was in some kind of permanent crisis state. Miraculously, and I mean that, I was cleared. The investigation concluded that the complaint was baseless and motivated by personal animus. My license was sustained. My job was secure. But something had changed, something had broken, and I wasn't sure it could be fixed. What I did know was that my family had chosen. They'd chosen Monica, they'd chosen the narrative she'd created, and they'd chosen to destroy me rather than question whether that narrative was true. I was 38 years old, and I finally understood that I would never have the family I'd hoped for. 2 years passed. I worked, I went to therapy. I slowly built a life that wasn't about seeking approval anymore. I made a friend named Marcus at work who was also a therapist, and he became the kind of person who saw me, really saw me, and didn't need me to perform or apologize or make myself smaller. We'd have lunch and talk about our clients in vague, ethical terms, and sometimes we'd just sit in silence, which was a kind of companionship I'd never experienced with my biological family. I sold the house David and I had bought together. I couldn't live in it anymore. It was full of before and I needed to figure out how to be after. I moved to a condo in Hartford that was downtown, walkable, real. It had big windows and old hardwood floors, and it felt like a place where someone could start over, which I needed to believe was possible. I still didn't hear from my parents. My mother didn't call for my birthday. My father didn't send a card. Monica certainly didn't reach out. The silence became a kind of wall that seemed permanent and insurmountable. Once at a professional conference, I ran into someone who'd gone to my high school. She asked how my family was doing, and I said they were fine, and she said something about how close we'd always seemed, and I smiled and changed the subject. People like to believe that families are fundamentally units of love. They don't understand that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the people who were there from the beginning. Life continued, it does that. I got a small promotion. I started supervising interns, which meant I was passing on something to people who were where I'd been, young, trying, hopping. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, my old supervisor, reached out to me at some point. She'd gotten my contact through the professional network and wanted to have coffee. When I sat down with her, she said something that mattered. "I've been thinking about you," she said. "I wondered how you were, and then I wondered why I hadn't reached out to check, and then I realized I'm part of a pattern where we expect people to come back and ask for help instead of just showing up." I cried. I don't think I'd cried in front of anyone in 2 years. "I didn't know where you were," I said. "You could have found me," she said. "I'm in the phone book. The point is I should have found you. I should have checked. I'm sorry." That apology, unsolicited, genuine, with no expectation of anything in return, did something to me. It suggested that people could change, that relationships could be repaired, that you could be acknowledged for what you were going through, without having to prove that you deserved the acknowledgement. Dr. Sarah and I started having coffee once a month. She became something like the mentor I'd always needed, and also something like the mother I'd never had, though I was careful about that framing because I'd learned that too much expectation was dangerous. Time kept moving. David's case was eventually closed officially. His parents moved away and we lost touch, which was probably necessary for both of us. I dated a woman named Jenny for about a year, and while it was kind, it wasn't right, and we ended on good terms. I became a supervisor, then the clinical director of the entire program. I was 40 years old, and I was finally starting to feel like I'd built something that was mine. Not a structure waiting to be approved by people who weren't going to approve of it, but an actual life that I had constructed piece by piece, decision by decision. I'd made it through the worst part of the worst things. I didn't know the worst part hadn't actually happened yet. It was a Tuesday in September when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, and the voice on the other end was a woman who identified herself as Detective Patricia Morales with the Connecticut State Police. "Dr. James," she asked, "I'm calling because we have some information about your husband, David James, and we'd like to schedule a time for you to come in and discuss it." The world stopped. I don't remember what I said. I know I agreed to come in. I know I called Margaret and told her I needed to take the rest of the day off. I know I sat on my couch and stared at nothing for an hour, trying to understand what it meant that David could still exist in the world in a way that involved the police calling me. The detective's office was in New Haven. I drove there in a state of such dissociation that I'm not entirely sure I actually drove the car. The parking lot seemed to appear beneath my feet. The building seemed to manifest around me. Detective Morales was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes, and the demeanor of someone who'd had to tell people terrible things many times. She had me sit down in a small room with bad fluorescent lighting and a table that was too big. "We found your husband," she said. "Or rather, we found his remains in a wooded area near the rest stop where his car was located. He'd been there for 4 years. The remains were identified through dental records." I made a sound, I'm not sure what sound. It wasn't words. "I'm sorry," she said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I know this has been a long time coming." "What happened?" I managed. "Based on the location and condition of the remains and some evidence we found at the scene, we believe he went into the woods, sat down and took his own life. He had some medication in the woods with him, antidepressants, that he didn't have a prescription for. We think he was buying medication on the street, possibly because he didn't want anyone to know he was struggling." I was not processing this correctly. My brain was doing something strange, moving sideways instead of forward. "His family didn't know he was depressed?" I asked. "Not that we could determine. It seems like he was hiding it from everyone." "Yes." I sat with that for a moment. 4 years. David had been in the woods for 4 years while I was trying to prove that I was sane enough to help other people. 4 years while my family was convinced I was being hysterical about his disappearance. 4 years while my sister was taking apart my career with information I'd given her in confidence. "We'd like to reach out to his family," the detective said, "but we wanted to make sure you were okay before we did that. Do you have contact information for them?" I gave her the information. I don't remember doing it, but the detective said thank you, and I must have answered because people do that. I drove home on what I think was autopilot. The sun was setting, and the sky was doing that thing it does in September where it looks like someone mixed all the colors together and forgot to stir. I think I was crying. I was definitely shaking. I called Dr. Huang, my therapist, and got her voicemail. I called Marcus and he came over with wine, which I didn't drink, and he sat with me while I tried to explain that my husband had been dead in the woods for 4 years and nobody had told me, and now my family's entire narrative about me being too emotional was actually more appropriate, still cruel but backed by some kind of truth. "What are you feeling?" Marcus asked, because we're therapists and we do this thing where we ask each other the hard questions. "I'm feeling like nothing is real and also like everything that happened was inevitable," I said. "I'm feeling like my family was right and also like they were the most wrong they've ever been. I'm feeling like I'm 40 years old and I'm still trying to understand what I did to deserve being invisible to people who were supposed to love me unconditionally." He didn't have an answer to that because there isn't one. By the next morning, I'd decided I needed to see my family. I needed to go back to the house in Connecticut and confront them with this information. Not angrily, I'd learned that anger wasn't going to help me, but clearly, with facts. I called my mother. "Hello," she said, like she didn't have my number stored, like I was a stranger. "Mom, I need to come by the house. I have something to tell you and Dad." There was a pause. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said, "but I'm coming by anyway, Saturday, 11 o'clock. I hung up before she could respond. I drove to Connecticut on Saturday morning with what I can only describe as a surgical mindset. I was clear. I was prepared. I was going to state facts, and I was going to let those facts do whatever they were going to do. My father answered the door, and he looked old. Actually old, not just visibly aging, but old in the way that happens when someone's been carrying something heavy for a long time. "Lily," he said, "your mother said you wanted to talk." "I want to talk to both of you," I said. We sat in the living room, the same room where they'd told me I was too emotional to be a therapist, and I told them that David had been found, that he'd been dead for 4 years, that the police believed he'd taken his own life and nobody knew he was depressed, and the whole narrative they'd built about me being hysterical had been built on a foundation that was completely unstable. My mother's face did something complicated. My father's face just closed. I see, he said. Do you? I asked. Because what I see is a pattern where you believed Monica over me, where you let her convince you I was unfit to be a therapist, where you disowned me while I was going through the worst thing I'd ever experienced, and where you never once asked me if I was okay. Not once. Not after David disappeared. Not after the investigation. Not even when you were trying to ruin my career. You never asked if I was okay. Lily, my mother started, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished, I said. I've spent my entire life making myself smaller so I wouldn't threaten Monica. I let you be distant with me because I assumed it was something I'd done. I accepted that I was the less than child, the less than daughter, the less than sister, but that was never actually true. I just lived in a family where I was treated like it was true, and I eventually believed it. We never meant, my father said. I don't actually care what you meant, I interrupted. That's the thing about intentions. They matter very little compared to impact. And the impact of what you did, of what you both did, was to make me believe that I was fundamentally unlovable. And then, when I was in crisis, you proved it. You made me alone when I needed family most. You made me invisible again just when I was finally trying to be seen. My mother was crying. My father was staring at his hands. Where is Monica? I asked. She's in New York, my mother said. She didn't know you were coming. Call her, I said. My mother looked at me like I'd asked her to do something dangerous. Why? Because I want to talk to her, and I want her here, and I want you to know this conversation is happening. My mother picked up the phone, she called Monica. My father and I sat in silence. It took Monica about 4 hours to get to the house. By the time she arrived, the tension had calcified into something that felt like it might never move again. Monica came through the door like she was arriving at a party, and then she saw me, and her face shifted in a way that was very interesting. There was recognition, but also something else. Fear, maybe, calculation, the understanding that I was no longer a person she could manage. Lily, she said, I didn't know you were coming. I did, I said, sit down. She sat. I told her about David. I told her that he had been depressed and hiding it, that he had killed himself in the woods, that the police had found his remains 4 years after he died. I told her that while I was grieving the worst way a person can grieve, she had been systematically destroying my career based on information I'd trusted her with. I was trying to help, Monica said, and the absolute casualness of the statement made something in me crystallize. Help who? I asked. Help me, by filing an anonymous complaint about my fitness to be a therapist, by telling our parents that my sexuality made me unstable, by convincing them that I was being too emotional about my husband vanishing. You were being too emotional, Monica said. You were falling apart, I thought. You didn't think, I said flatly. You calculated. You saw an opportunity to make me smaller and you took it. And you did it during the worst thing I've ever experienced. You did it when I was broken and needed my family, and instead you made me alone. Lily, I don't want to hear it, I said. I don't want your explanation or your apology or whatever script you're going to follow. What I want is for you to understand that you hurt me in a way that was calculated and premeditated. You did that knowing exactly what you were doing. And the only reason I'm even telling you this is so that you understand the cost of what you did. Monica looked at my parents like they might rescue her. They didn't. What do you want from us? My father asked quietly. I want you to understand what you did, I said. All of you, and I want you to understand that I'm not coming back. Not to this family. Not in the way you probably want me to. I'm done performing for approval. I'm done making myself small. I'm done trying to earn love from people who only know how to love conditionally. Lily, please, my mother said. No, I said. You don't get to ask me to relent. That's not how this works. You hurt me, now you have to sit with that. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't hug anyone. I just walked to the door and left, and the last thing I heard was my mother crying, which was something, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. I drove home and I didn't cry and I didn't eat and I didn't do much of anything for about 48 hours. I just existed in my apartment and let the silence fill things up. On Monday, I went back to work. Margaret asked how I was and I said I was managing. I saw my regular clients and I was present with them in a way that felt important and also strange because I'd just blown up my own life and here I was helping other people with theirs. Dr. Wong had an opening and I took it. I went back, I told her. I went to see my family. How was that? She asked. It was necessary, I said, but it doesn't mean anything changes. They were hoping I'd come home and I made it clear that I'm not, that I can't. Do you think you'll ever be ready to forgive them? She asked. I don't know, I said. I think forgiveness requires the other person to change, and I don't think my family is interested in changing. I think they're interested in going back to how things were, and I'm not interested in that. What are you interested in? Dr. Wong asked. Living my own life, I said, not as a reaction to them, not as an attempt to prove something, just living it. The next 3 months were strange. My family tried to reach out. My mother sent letters. My father called twice. Monica didn't try, which somehow felt like the most honest thing she could have done. I didn't respond to the letters. I didn't call my father back. I let them all sit in the silence of my non-response, which I think was probably more effective than anything I could have said. What I did instead was focus on my work. I was promoted to clinical director officially, which meant I was now overseeing the entire mental health program at the clinic. It was a big job. It required presence and leadership, and the ability to hold other people's struggles while maintaining your own equilibrium. I was good at it, not perfect but good. I also started working on a research project with Marcus about intergenerational trauma and how it manifests in therapeutic relationships. It was the kind of work that was personal without being self-indulgent, that took my pain and turned it into something that could help other people understand themselves better. 6 months after the confrontation, Dr. Sarah called me with a question. How would you feel about supervising a graduate student? She asked. I have someone from my private practice program who's doing their practicum, and I think you'd be good for them. Why would you think that? I asked. Because you understand what it means to be invisible in a system that's supposed to help you, she said. Because you've had to figure out how to be seen without performing, because you can teach people to do that. I said yes. The student's name was Clea, and she was 24 and terrified and trying so hard to be perfect. I recognized myself in her, which is probably why Dr. Sarah had suggested it. Can I tell you something? I said to her in our first supervision session. Of course, she said. The thing that's going to make you a great therapist is not your perfect technique or your theoretical knowledge or your ability to understand what's happening in the room, I said. It's your willingness to be uncertain. It's your ability to sit with someone else's pain without needing to fix it or explain it. And I promise you, you can't do that if you're performing perfection. You have to be real. She cried. I gave her tissues and let her sit with it. That became my teaching philosophy. Real, not perfect. Present, not polished. 1 year after I confronted my family, I got a phone call from my mother. I was in my office and my secretary said she was calling and I almost didn't take it, but I did. Hello, I said. Lily, it's Mom. Her voice was different, smaller maybe, more uncertain. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to try anyway. Your father wanted me to call. He wanted you to know that he's been seeing a therapist and it's been difficult, but he's been trying to understand some of the ways he failed you. I didn't say anything. I also wanted to tell you that Monica is in therapy. She's dealing with some things about why she did what she did, and she's not making excuses, but she's trying to understand it. And I've been reading some books about family systems and patterns, and I've been realizing how much of what I did was about control, about needing things to be a certain way, about not knowing how to mother a daughter who was different from her sister. I still didn't say anything, but I was listening. I'm not asking you to come back, my mother continued. I'm not asking you to forgive us or to pretend that what happened didn't matter. I'm just telling you that we're trying. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Lily. I'm sorry for the ways I made you feel like you weren't enough. I'm sorry for the ways I let your sister hurt you. I'm sorry for being a mother who was more concerned with her image of family than with her actual children. There was a lot of silence after that. I need time, I said finally. I don't know if I can forgive this. I don't know if we can have the kind of relationship where we just move forward, but I hear you, and maybe that's a start. I'll take that, my mother said. After I hung up, I sat in my office and I cried, which is something I'd learned to do without it breaking everything else. I let the tears happen, and I also held on to the fact that I was fundamentally okay, that my world was not collapsing, that I could feel something difficult and still be functional. That was growth, I thought. That was actual healing. Over the next year, we started rebuilding, not quickly and not in a linear way. My mother sent me an email saying she'd finished a book about mother-daughter relationships, and she wanted to know if I'd be willing to talk about it with her. I said maybe. She sent me her notes anyway, which I read, and which were genuinely thoughtful. My father called me on my birthday. It was awkward, but he called and he asked how I was doing, and he didn't try to make it about anything except that he wanted to know. I answered honestly. He listened. Monica was harder. She sent a letter, not an email, an actual physical letter, that started with an apology and then went into a kind of vulnerable explanation of her own issues, her own insecurities, the ways she'd felt threatened by me even when I was trying to be invisible. She wrote about therapy and what she was learning about herself. She wrote about how much of what she'd done had been driven by fear. I read it multiple times. I didn't respond right away. Eventually, I did respond. I didn't forgive everything. I said something like, "I believe that you're trying to understand yourself better, and I think that's important. I'm not sure we can have the kind of relationship we had before, but I'm willing to see if we can build something different, something slower and more careful." That's where we left it for a while. 3 years after the confrontation, I was 39 years old, which seems impossible to me. I'd rebuilt my life, I'd found work that mattered, I'd created a family of choice that included Marcus and Dr. Sarah and Claire, who'd now become a colleague. My mother and I had tea once a month. My father called on important dates. Monica and I had coffee twice a year, which was awkward and stiff, but also genuine in a way our previous relationship had never been. I was single and I was okay with that. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me or to validate me or to give me permission to exist. I was focused on the work I did and the life I'd built for myself. And then, one afternoon, a woman named Elena came in for an intake appointment. She was referred to me by a colleague, and she had a history of depression and anxiety, and she'd been through some family stuff that she wanted to process. She was in her early 40s, which meant we were approximately the same age. She was a teacher, which meant she spent her days caring for other people. I don't believe in love at first sight. I believe in recognition, which is different. I recognized something in Elena, a careful hope, a willingness to try, a kind of exhaustion that comes from doing the work of healing without knowing if it will actually matter. Of course, I couldn't pursue a relationship with her while she was my client. That would be unethical, and I've learned that ethics are not optional. But I also knew that I was the wrong therapist for her. I had too much in the room with her already. I referred her to another therapist and told her honestly that I thought she'd be better served by someone else. I didn't tell her why. 3 months later, when she'd finished her treatment, I ran into her at a coffee shop. We talked for 20 minutes and it was easy, and she laughed at my jokes, and when I asked for her number, she gave it to me. "I wondered if you might ask," she said. We dated slowly. We took our time. We were both people who'd been hurt in ways that made us careful, and we didn't rush anything. Elena knew about David. She knew about my family. She knew about the years of invisibility and the slow rebuilding. And she stayed anyway, which meant something. By the time I turned 42, Elena had moved into my apartment. We were talking about the future in a way that felt safe, and my life had become something I actually wanted to live, not something I was just surviving. My family noticed the change. My mother asked about Elena when we had tea. My father asked how I was doing in a way that seemed to suggest he actually wanted to know. Monica sent a text that said, "I'm glad you're happy," which was small but also significant. Last month my family called a meeting, not in a scary way like before, but in a deliberate, formal way that suggested they'd been planning something. Elena encouraged me to go. "Maybe they want to make amends," she said. I was skeptical, but I went. They wanted me to come home for a weekend, to spend time together, to talk about some things that had been coming up in their therapy sessions, to try to figure out if we could have a relationship that was different from what we'd had before. I told them I'd think about it. I called Dr. Huang and talked about what that might mean, and what I would and wouldn't be willing to accept. I thought about all the ways this could go wrong. But I also thought about all the ways it could go right. The following Saturday, I drove back to Connecticut. Elena came with me, which was either a brilliant decision or a terrible one, and we wouldn't know until we were in the middle of it. We arrived at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. My mother had cooked. My father had cleaned. Monica had come down from New York and had even brought her girlfriend, Sarah. which was a significant step given that she'd been closeted when I was growing up. We sat at the dining room table, not the one where they'd told me I was too emotional, but a different one that my mother had apparently bought for this occasion. It was an old wooden table with 4 plates on it, which felt important and symbolic in a way that I hope wasn't accidental. "We wanted to say some things," my mother began, and I can see now that this took enormous courage for her. "We wanted to say them all together in front of each other, so you could see that we mean them." What followed was about 45 minutes of my parents and sister acknowledging specific things they'd done wrong, not in a blanket way, but in detail. My father talked about checking out when Monica was struggling in ways I didn't understand. My mother talked about valuing appearance and control over actual connection. Monica talked about using her power to undermine me, about making herself feel secure by making me feel small. I listened, I didn't interrupt, I let them finish. Then I said, "I hear you, and I think it's good that you're trying to understand these things, but I need to be clear about something. I'm not doing this because I want to go back to how things were. I'm doing this because I'm in a place where I can set boundaries and mean them, and I'm willing to see if we can build something new. But it has to be different. It has to be real." "What does that mean?" my mother asked. "It means you have to keep doing the work," I said. "It means you can't slip back into old patterns. It means if one of you hurts me again, I'm going to tell you clearly. And you're going to listen. And it means we're not going to pretend that these years didn't happen or that they didn't matter." "We're not asking you to," my father said. "Good," I said, "because I wouldn't anyway." We ate dinner. It was strange and imperfect and uncomfortable in some moments and genuine in others. Monica asked Elena questions about her work. My mother complimented her cooking. My father asked me about a research project I was working on. No one pretended it was perfect. No one tried to turn it into some kind of hallmark family moment. We just sat there, 4 people and their people, trying to figure out how to be together differently. After dinner, my mother pulled me aside. "I wanted to tell you something," she said, "something we haven't told anyone yet." I felt my defenses rise, but I waited. "We liquidated some accounts," she said. "Your father and we set up a fund for your education, in case you wanted to pursue further degrees or training. And we set up another fund for you to just have, as a kind of acknowledgement of the ways we failed to support you." I was confused. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because we wanted you to know that we're not just saying words," she said. "We're trying to back them up with action. We can't give you back the years you lost. We can't undo the ways we hurt you. But we can acknowledge that we owe you a debt, and this is our attempt to begin paying it." I don't think I actually said anything. I just looked at her. "You don't have to accept it," my mother said, "but it's there if you want it, it's yours." I cried, which is becoming a thing I'm more comfortable with. I let my mother hug me, which was also new. And then I went back into the kitchen and I was quiet for a while. Elena found me later and asked if I was okay. "I think I'm going to be," I said. "I'm not sure what this all means yet, but I think I'm going to be." The reason I'm telling you this story is not because I think it has a neat ending, or because I've forgiven everything, or because my family has suddenly become the family I always wanted them to be. That's not how real healing works. The reason I'm telling you this story is because I spent 40 years of my life trying to be small enough to fit into someone else's vision of who I should be, and it took losing everything, my husband, my career, my family, before I finally understood that I was always enough. The reason I'm telling you this story is because there are so many of us who grew up invisible. We grew up in families that valued appearance over authenticity, control over connection, the perfect image over actual relationship. We grew up in families where our pain was treated as an inconvenience, where our vulnerability was something to be managed, where we were taught that our worth was conditional on our performance. And I'm here to tell you that was wrong. That was never true. That your worth is not conditional. That your vulnerability is not weakness. That you are allowed to take up space, to have needs, to be imperfect and still be loved. My family didn't know how to do that for me. That's on them, not on me. And it took a very long time for me to understand the difference. What I know now is this: I survived the worst thing I've ever survived, and I did it without needing my family to validate my survival. I built a career that matters to me, and I did it without needing their approval. I found love with Elena, and it's real in a way that doesn't depend on anyone else's recognition. I have a chosen family that sees me, that knows me, that shows up for me because they want to, not because they feel obligated to. And I'm working on a slow, careful reconciliation with my biological family, not because I need them to complete me, but because I'm strong enough now to set boundaries and mean them. I'm strong enough to say yes in a way that's actually yes, and no in a way that's actually no. My mother and I have tea once a month. We talk about books and about her work and about the things she's learning in therapy. It's good. It's not deep, but it doesn't have to be. It's real, and that's enough. My father and I are slowly rebuilding something that looks like respect. He calls me on important dates. He asks about my work. He hasn't apologized perfectly, but he's apologized genuinely, and that matters. Monica and I text sometimes. She tells me about her girlfriend. I tell her about Elena. We're not close in the way siblings can be, but we're something. We're people who hurt each other and are now trying to understand why. This is not the family of my dreams. This is not the family I spent 40 years trying to create through the sheer force of making myself smaller and smaller and smaller. This is the family I'm choosing to build now, with clear eyes and careful boundaries, and the full understanding that nothing is guaranteed. And that's okay. That's actually better than okay. That's real. If you've been invisible too, if you've spent your life trying to earn love from people who couldn't see you no matter how hard you tried, I want you to know something. Stop waiting for them to see you. See yourself. Look at what you've built. Look at the people who actually showed up. Look at the work you've done, the care you've given, the strength you've developed just by surviving. You don't need their approval to be enough. You already are. My name is Lily James, and I'm finally learning what it means to be seen.